hoping that you all will learn to compare Alzheimer's and dementia. Hopefully, you will be able to recognize how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain. We are going to list the risk factors of Alzheimer's disease. In this program, we're going to identify the stages of the disease, describe how scientists are working to advance the research, and then you all have some resources that you picked up prior to the program starting. And I'm going to name additional resources that the Alzheimer's Association offers. So Alzheimer's is a global crisis, and you are likely hearing more and more about the disease because, as someone mentioned prior to the program, we're aging out. More and more folks are getting older and dying at later stages in their life. So before we begin the program, we're going to start with a knowledge question. We're going to test your knowledge. So approximately worldwide, there are 55 million folks that have Alzheimer's or other dementia. How many folks do you think have Alzheimer's or other dementia? Oh, actually just Alzheimer's in the United States. How many think over 3 million? How about 6 million? 8 million? 11 million. Okay, so some of you thought between 6 and 11 million. The answer is 6 million Americans are diagnosed with the disease. And that number is expected to more than double to 13 million by the year 2050. So those are staggering statistics, and the Alzheimer's Association is really trying to address the issue. Okay, another test your knowledge question. So this lady here said that she's a caregiver. About how many Americans provide unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's or other dementia? How many think about 8 million? Yeah, okay. Over 11 million. Okay, more than 18 million. How many of you think more than 18? Well, the 11 million, I think that is the correct answer. And I think a bunch of you, most of you raised your hand on that. So that number really is staggering. And those numbers translate into $272 billion that folks could have earned if they were paid. Caregivers give over 18 billion hours of care just last year. And as I said, it was valued over $200+ billion. So as you can see, the disease takes a toll and a personal impact, not only on the person that has been diagnosed with the disease, but on caregivers and their families as well. So let's learn a little bit more about the statistics. section of this talk, we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's and dementia. And as I mentioned earlier, the words are used interchangeably, but they're different. They're different. And in this section, we're going to talk about why they're different. And before we do that, we're going to go and test your knowledge again. So let's do that. True or false? Alzheimer's is a normal part of aging. Who thinks that Alzheimer's is a normal part of aging? Good. False. It is false. Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging, although I will say that age is the highest risk factor for getting Alzheimer's. At age 65, after you reach the age of 65, your chances double. By age 80 plus, 1 in 3 will be diagnosed with the disease. Another question. So true or false again? People younger than 65 can get Alzheimer's. True or false? That is true. That is true. It's called younger onset Alzheimer's. Folks as early as age 40 have been diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's. So we're going to hear from an expert. Her name is Dr. Heather Schneider. She's at our national headquarters in Chicago, and she's going to be talking about what Alzheimer's is and what dementia is.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So you saw the umbrella that said dementia, and then underneath that umbrella, you saw Alzheimer's, Lewy body, frontal lobal, I think, and Huntington's, maybe Parkinson's was in there too. So think about that umbrella being cancer. The name cancer, then underneath the cancer, you've got melanoma, breast cancer, colon cancer. So that is the difference. Dementia is the bigger term, and then underneath dementia, you have all the other terms. Alzheimer's disease is the #1 cause of dementia. Between 60 to 80% of folks are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It's important to get an early diagnosis. Right now, we are on the cutting edge of having drugs that treat the biology of the disease, not just the symptoms. And those specific drugs are used in the early stages of Alzheimer's. So if you get a diagnosis and you're in an early stage, you might be eligible to get a drug that treats the biology of the disease instead of the symptoms. We're going to hear from a caregiver who felt like they needed an early diagnosis.
Certainly having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. it explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
So, as I mentioned, that we've got new drugs that treat the biology of the disease. The drug was Leqembi. It was approved by the FDA in 2023, and it does treat the plaques and tangles that form in the brain that causes dementia. But it is important to get an early and an accurate diagnosis so that you have more time. You can plan what you might want in terms of care, in terms of financial planning as one continues with the disease progression. So just to recap, dementia is a general term for a collection of symptoms that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer's, as I mentioned, 60 to 80% of folks are diagnosed with this dementia, and it's the most common dementia. And the most important part, or one of the things to know, is that Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging. It is a progressive brain disease. So next we're going to talk about Alzheimer's in the brain. As I mentioned earlier, Alzheimer's is a brain disease. The brain is the most complex organ in our body. It weighs around 3 pounds, a normal brain. At the end of life, a person that has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and died of Alzheimer's, their brain weighs 1 pound. So you can see the shrinkage. What happens is that the nerve endings that connect to other nerve endings in the brain start to die off, and that causes brain shrinkage. Anybody can ask a question throughout, and I will try to answer. I'm not a doctor, but I will, if I can't answer the question, will direct you to someone who can. Ma'am?
Is there a hereditary?
There is a hereditary component. There is. I think Dr. Heather Schneider, will talk about the hereditary component. There are risk genes, she says, and deterministic genes, and she will talk about those later. And just because you have the risk gene does not necessarily mean that one will be diagnosed with the disease. Plus, we have a program, as I mentioned to one of the ladies who grabbed one of my brochures. It's a science-based program that one can add around 10 strategies to your lifestyle to reduce the risk of getting Alzheimer's or other dementia. These are proven strategies that if one incorporates into one's life, one can mitigate the risk of getting Alzheimer's, other dementia, even if you have had a family member that has been diagnosed with this disease. So we're going to hear from Dr. Maria Carrillo, who is also at the Alzheimer's Association in Chicago, and she's going to talk a little bit more about what Alzheimer's is, and you'll see the little brain on the side and how it's shrunk.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
So you saw the shrunken brain, and as I mentioned, it could weigh 1 pound at the end of life. So again, a recap of this particular section. More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer's described specific changes in the brain, the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's causes nerve cells to die, shrinkage of the brain, which leads, as I said, to shrinkage in the brain. And then the brain changes result in changes in memory, thinking, and behavior. Ma'am.
What can they, you said there are ways that things that you can do to prevent it? Is there a list of these things?
Yes. I do have, I think I have a couple of flyers that I can share. I don't think I have enough for everybody, but yes, there are things that one can do, incorporate in your life to reduce the risk of getting the disease. So everyone with a brain really is at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. There are few known factors that increase a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's, and we're going to see which is the most common. So I think you guys had a little bit of a review because I told you earlier what it was. So, excuse me, I keep doing that with my computer. What is the greatest risk known factor for Alzheimer's disease? Genetics? Who thinks genetics? Family history? Age? Age is correct. Age is the largest risk factor of getting the disease. And as I mentioned earlier, that although it's not a part of normal aging, age is the greatest risk factor, that after age 65, the risk of Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years, and 34% of folks living after age 85 are going to be diagnosed with the disease. Any questions so far? So I want to reiterate that although Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging, age is the greatest known risk factor. There are many, many questions about, so what are other risk factors? And Dr. Heather Schneider is going to talk about a couple of them.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. And when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are two categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So in addition to the main risks of the general population, African Americans are twice as likely as their white counterparts to get the disease. I'm Hispanic, and I'm 1.5 times more likely than my white counterpart to get the disease. Women, we don't know if because they live longer, but women are 2/3 more, they get 2/3 of Americans living with Alzheimer's are women. We don't know if this is because they're living longer. Death rates can partially explain this difference, but researchers are really exploring how the genetic differences between men and women may impact, the disease risk. Questions? Ma'am? If you're Black or Hispanic and you're a woman?
Yes.
Yes. So to recap this part of the talk, age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. and an individual is at risk for developing the disease, it will increase at age 65, and every 5 years it will double. Family history is also known as a risk factor. Risk genes and deterministic genes are two types of genes associated with Alzheimer's, and Black and Hispanic Americans are at higher risk of getting the disease than their white counterparts. So now we're going to talk about the stages of the disease. No two individuals experience the symptoms and the progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. And sometimes you can get mixed symptoms. You can have some that are considered stage 1 or mild, and then mixed in with some that are considered, moderate. So let's hear from some individuals who have the disease and how they're coping with it.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
An overachiever, and when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
What surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive, and I'm finding that I'm forgetting more. And they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor's, and so that becomes a little disconcerting at times, to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
So again, these individuals that we heard, did you notice the first gentleman, how he was struggling to find the word even in the conversation? He couldn't, and then he finally found it. So all three of these individuals are living in the early stage of the disease. Symptoms will worsen over time for everyone. Everyone who has Alzheimer's, symptoms will not get better, they will worsen. But people are going to progress at different stages as their abilities change, and as they incorporate, certain things that will help them navigate the disease. So on average, a person who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's lives 4 to 8 years after diagnosis. But it has been shown that a person can live up to 20 years after they have been diagnosed with the disease. And again, it's based on many different factors. So we're going to talk now about the progression of the disease. So you can see that we have a teal and a yellow-orange and then a purple continuum. This is called the Alzheimer's disease continuum. The progression of Alzheimer's disease from brain changes that are unnoticeable to a person's to brain changes that cause problems with memory and eventually physical disability is called the Alzheimer's disease continuum. And so on this continuum, you're going to find three broad phases. And you'll see the teal, asymptomatic. This particular stage, you can start forming the plaques and tangles in your brain up to 10 years before symptoms show up. So you will have no cognitive symptoms, but possible biological changes in the brain. And it could be that these changes are occurring 10 years before one is diagnosed with the disease. And then MCI, that's an acronym for mild cognitive impairment. That is an early stage of cognitive ability loss. You can't enter into Alzheimer's. Some people may have mild cognitive impairment and never get Alzheimer's. And then the dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, that purple stage is again divided into three stages: mild, moderate, and severe. And then the mild stage typically involves symptoms that interfere with some daily activities. Moderate is more pronounced symptoms that interfere with many daily activities. And then the symptoms at the severe stage, symptoms that interfere with most daily activities. Yes, you could have dementia. You could have dementia and then get something else that is also considered dementia, Lewy body, or frontal lobe, which is what Bruce Willis has. It's a form of dementia, much like cancer being a form of, like breast cancer is cancer, and colon cancer is cancer. Cancer is cancer. Does that make sense? There are three broad phases of the disease: asymptomatic, MCI due to Alzheimer's disease, and dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. The dementia phase is further broken down into three main categories: mild, moderate, and severe. No two individuals, as I mentioned earlier, experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's in the same way. We're individuals. And while symptoms worsen over time, people progress through the stages at different rates as their abilities change. So now I'm going to talk about FDA-approved treatments. So current medications cannot cure Alzheimer's. As I mentioned earlier, there are two. One has already been approved by the FDA. Leqembi was approved in July of 2023, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Donanemab is up for approval, hopefully by the spring, and that even further reduces plaques and tangles in the brain, which is very, very exciting. Treatments may be administered as a pill, patch, intravenously. I don't know that did I even go through okay, this is not on the slide. Okay, so I mentioned up until 2021, when Aduhelm, which was a drug that first came out, had a rocky start. It is no longer produced by the drug manufacturer. It was too expensive and people weren't using it. Leqembi came out in July of 2023. It is infusion. Folks probably go in twice a week to get infused with this drug. And then now, donanemab is something that we're looking to get, not us, not the Alzheimer's Association, but the drug that shows a lot of hope. Prior to that, we just had drugs that treated the symptoms of the disease. Up until, and I think it started, there was a timeline on my old PowerPoint that I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s, where we started to have Aricept and all of those particular drugs that treated, like I said, just the symptom of the disease. So now we are in a very exciting time where we're looking to find a cure for Alzheimer's. So these treatments work in varying degrees and are not effective for everyone. We do have a conversation with a healthcare professional to determine whether a specific treatment is appropriate. And then if you want to learn more, you can always go to alz.org/treatments to learn more about the drugs that are out there. So we're trying to advance the research, as I mentioned. We are like I said, in an exciting time in research, and researchers have made enormous strides in the last 10 years, and we're going to hear about that right now.
This is an incredibly exciting time in Alzheimer's and dementia research. The advancements that we've made in the last decade to understand the disease is a continuum, meaning that the biological changes are starting a decade or more before someone is experiencing the changes in the memory and thinking. This sets the stage for possible prevention. The idea that when we have the tools to identify those individuals at the earliest time point, and when we have the interventions to target individuals at that earliest time point, we can intervene to stop or slow the progression of the disease before an individual loses their memories.
So as I mentioned, we are in an exciting time of research, and hopefully a cure will be found. The Dr. Maria Carrillo will talk about incorporating those lifestyles that are proven strategies to reduce the risk of getting Alzheimer's or other dementia.
Growing evidence indicates that people can reduce their risk of cognitive decline by adopting key lifestyle habits. More and more research shows that factors like exercise, nutrition, and aggressive management of cardiovascular risk factors may impact our ability to slow cognitive decline as we age. And through current studies, we're exploring how certain lifestyle factors may even reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia.
All the research that is being done. Even though there is not a cure today for the disease, I know in my heart there is going to be a cure one day, and I know we're getting closer for that cure. Because even if you fail in a research study, you learn from that failure in the research study. That failure always brings progression.
Securing the
nice
funds.
to see the association spearheading in many ways the emphasis on getting the money at the federal level and at the private sector to get the research done so that someday there will be an effective treatment, hopefully cure, hopefully prevention.
So we also support clinical trials. If you go to our website, there's a search engine that you can plug in your zip code and search for clinical trials. You can call our 24/7 hotline number, and they too can direct you to clinical trials as well. And we're going to hear about these now.
Participating in a clinical study is one way that everyone can get involved in a very direct way in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. And for people who currently have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are some additional benefits. You get access to very close medical care. You also may be among the first people to have access to the treatments that will eventually prove to work.
You might hear the phrase negative trial, which means it didn't hit the endpoint. It didn't result in an FDA-approved treatment for the disease. But I think the only negative trial is one that doesn't provide us with valuable information. If the trial is well designed and is a good scientific experiment, we can get extremely valuable data that can help plan the next trial and make it even better than the last one. And it gets you that much closer to that FDA-approved drug, to that effective treatment, and maybe someday even prevention.
So this is the recap. Scientists have increased their understanding of Alzheimer's significantly over the past decade. People living with dementia, caregivers, and healthy volunteers without dementia really are needed for the clinical studies so that we can find methods of prevention, treatment, and ultimately a cure. And both drug and non-drug studies are taking place across the country and online. And if you want to hear more about Trial Match, go to alz.org/trial match. That is a free clinical studies matching service. So as I said, I work for the Alzheimer's Association. We have 600 offices throughout the United States. And we're in communities, in towns, cities, trying to directly help families and caregivers who are facing this disease. So the Alzheimer's Association really leads the way to trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's and other dementia. And we want to do this by accelerating global research. We want to drive risk reduction, and we want to drive early detection, and we want to maximize quality care and support. And really, our vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. So these are the resources that I was talking about when I started this talk. We're available whenever or wherever you need reliable information and support. The online 24/7 helpline number. Let's hear from
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center when I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask. You know, there's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
Here is that 24/7 helpline card. A lot of you picked this up before the program started. This is my favorite resource to refer folks to. You will have someone answer your call within 60 seconds of you calling this phone number. You will have a master's level clinician answer the phone and answer any question that you might have, from clinical studies to new drugs that are out there, to calling in the middle of the night because you're anxious, or calling in the middle of the night because one must redirect a loved one who is saying they want to go swimming when it's 32 degrees outside. It is free of charge. You can call as many times as you want. You can, if you want a care consultation, they will direct you to someone locally here in Massachusetts to talk to you about it, an hour, to give you guidance on what next steps might be with regards to finances, maybe finding an adult daycare or a facility, a memory care facility. So like I said, it's one of my favorite resources to refer folks to. And when I can't answer the question, because a lot of times people will ask me questions that I'm not a doc and I don't know, that is not my area of expertise, I refer them to the helpline number because they will answer the question. Online, alz.org, our website.
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what is Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure, how long has this been around, how many people are affected by this, where can I go for resources, where can I go for help, what do I do with this, how can I handle this, is there more people like me out there, is there someone that I can talk to? if I need to. And there I found a support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
And as I mentioned, that search engine on the website, the Alzheimer's Association has partnered with AARP to have this search engine, and it's called the Community Resource Finder.
I've been diagnosed with dementia. The one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
So this is all free of charge to folks that are calling the helpline number. This education programming is also free of charge to you, but there are ways we have fundraising that helps pay for these services, and you can join the fight by volunteering. I do work with volunteers to deliver this type of programming as well in Boston and up through the North Shore. Advocacy, we are working with local, state, and federal governments to pass legislation that is favorable to caregivers and to pass very important Alzheimer's and other dementia legislation. Trial Match is another service that you can get involved in by volunteering to be part of a clinical study. That would give us great knowledge as to how we can find preventions, how we can, help find a cure for the disease. And then we have Walk to End Alzheimer's. It's our fundraising event here in Cambridge. It was one of the largest fundraising events in the United States. We raised over $1 million for the Alzheimer's Association and the Longest Day, where you can pick your own fundraising activity and donate those funds to the Alzheimer's Association. On March 1st and 2nd, I do want to say that there's another resource that is available to you. I'm going to leave this here. It's a family care conference on March 1st and 2nd. We will have panel discussions. It's a virtual conference, free of charge, where the first, March 1st, folks that are living with Alzheimer's and dementia will be on that panel. On the 2nd, March 2nd, there will be a panel of caregivers. You'll get some great tips and tricks, some great insight on how to face this disease, knowing that you're not alone, that there is a community of other folks that you can walk with. So that concludes this program, this talk. Any questions? Ma'am? Yes, I can. As I said, it's a different program, and we could maybe do something here to talk more in depth, but I can give you a high-level view. Nutrition. Eating all the colors of the rainbow. Really adopting the Mediterranean diet is what this particular program talks about, and there is a DASH diet too that you can incorporate. Exercise. At least, like the American Cancer Society recommends, at least 3 times a week, 30 minutes every time you do it. But if you can incorporate exercise, good nutrition, sleep is another one that is something that is a strategy that you should incorporate to help mitigate the risk of getting Alzheimer's or other dementia. Socialization. Doing this COA is so important for community amongst, folks, because that will help reduce the risk. Sir, Kevin.
I apologize if you talked about those. What about pets?
They do help, but that wasn't in one of our strategies. That's not the strat. Yeah. And if you can combine the socialization with the exercise, like you have a bud that you're walking with and you're talking and processing the day, that is even more beneficial to reducing the risk of getting Alzheimer's or other dementia. Not smoking. You can't smoke. Those are just off of the top of my head are some of the strategies that one can incorporate in one's daily life. And these are scientifically proven strategies. I want to really emphasize that there's research, as Dr. Maria Carrillo said, that shows that it will reduce the risk of you getting Alzheimer's. Absolutely, I'll give you, yeah, well, I can give them all away, but I don't have enough for y'all, so.
See how large it is.
Well, so I don't know if Kevin, if you want to copy for those that are interested. So it's 10 ways to love your brain. One side is English and the other side is Spanish. So look at the English side. And I am really hesitant to give these away because if you can copy just one of the front side, because my Spanish-speaking folks need the Spanish side, and we have very, very few of the Spanish side of them. So. He's going to copy them for you, and he's going to pass them out. You're welcome.
Oh, that's good.
Any other questions? Ma'am.
I'm totally absorbed in your presentation, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Timing couldn't be better.
Oh, thank you.
And I was wondering, in the course of all the experimentation that has taken place in the physicality, I'll call it, of Alzheimer's, was chelation ever mentioned?
Ma'am, I don't know what chelation is.
Oh, okay.
Can you, I don't know what that is.
Okay, it's a certain way of treating the circulation of the blood in order to make sure that it's taking care of all of the internal areas that it's meant to take care of.
Right.
And very often, if there's a short diagnosis to be made with a patient sitting in a chair for maybe an hour, they'll put the chelation test to a permitted trial. This is the patient would allow it to happen to himself. And they'd run it through and then give the result. Chances are everything would turn out just fine. But on the odd chance that something would surface, they would have that too. If all the complexity could involve
Right.
that.
I will say, though, in Europe this year, doctors were talking about a blood test in your primary doc's office where they will take a sample of blood that can measure the plaques and tangles in the brain. That is years, 5 to 10 years down the line, but it is a very promising way of detecting or blood test in your primary doc's office. Ma'am?
If they do it in Europe, why are they not doing it here?
Oh, no. In Europe, there was a convention of folks that are looking for a cure for Alzheimer's disease. And the docs there were talking about a blood test being administered in a primary doc's office to see if one has, Alzheimer's. But that, like I said, is 5 to 10 years down the road. Sure.
Is the biological
Well, Leqembi, the last I heard, costs $21,000 a year for that treatment. And early on, when Leqembi was approved by the FDA, and normally when it's approved by the FDA, Medicare just automatically approves it, and Medicare did not approve Leqembi for use. And we advocated, and it was approved in July. Medicare approved it in July, and now folks can get treated with Leqembi, and Medicare pay for it. And that includes, I think that's including the CAT scan, which is also expensive. and all of the other tests prior to getting the infusion of Leqembi. So yes, it's $21,000 a year. I don't know if donanemab gets approved in the early spring. I don't know what that drug costs, but it was very expensive. It's still an expensive drug. Can you imagine who's got $21,000, a year to pay for? Thank you again for having me. Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me. You've been a very, very attentive audience, and if you have any further questions, call that number. They will give you the answers.